The World Cup is finally here. After years of planning, billions of dollars in investment, and endless promises about the biggest football tournament ever created, the matches have begun. Stadiums are opening, fans are arriving, nations are chasing history. On paper, this should be FIFA's moment of triumph. Instead, only days into the tournament, a different story continues to dominate the conversation. A referee denied entry before he could take part. A qualified nation struggling to get supporters into stadiums. Growing criticism from some of football's most respected voices. And a tournament that, despite all the football being played, it cannot seem to escape the controversies surrounding it, because FIFA believed that once the opening whistle blew, the headlines would change. The focus would shift back to goals, rivalries, and unforgettable moments. But that hasn't happened. If anything, the start of the World Cup has exposed just how many unresolved questions were waiting beneath the surface, and for the organization behind the tournament, that may be the most worrying development of all. The most talked about figure in football wasn't a superstar striker or a title contender, it was a referee who never got the chance to step onto the pitch. Omar Abdul Qadir Artan's journey should have been one of the great stories of this World Cup. Years of dedication had earned him a place among the tournament's selected officials. For Somalia, it was a historic moment. For Artan, it was the reward for a career spent working toward the highest level of the sport. But instead of preparing for matches, he found himself preparing for a flight home, stopped at an airport, denied entry. Removed from the competition before it even began. FIFA issued statements. Officials explained procedures. Governments pointed toward regulations. Yet none of that changed the image that spread across football. One of the tournament's own referees, officially selected to participate, unable to enter the country hosting the event. The story resonated because it challenged one of football's most cherished ideas, the belief that the World Cup belongs to everyone, that talent, commitment, and achievement are enough. Whether that perception was fair or not became almost irrelevant. The symbolism was already powerful, and within hours, supporters around the world were talking about something far bigger than refereeing appointments. Then another controversy emerged, this time involving an entire football nation. Iran's Football Federation claimed that supporters who should have had access to tickets were suddenly facing uncertainty. For most fans, tickets are not simply pieces of paper. They are years of anticipation. Savings accounts emptied, flights booked, dreams built around 90 minutes of football. The World Cup has always been about more than the players on the field. It is also about the supporters who travel thousands of miles to follow them. That is why the story immediately gained attention, because it touched one of the emotional foundations of the tournament itself, the relationship between a nation and its fans, whether the issue was administrative, political, or logistical. The public perception was devastating. Once again, football was competing for attention, with stories about restrictions and access. Once again, questions were being asked about who could fully participate in the biggest sporting event on Earth. And once again, FIFA found itself caught in a situation it could not easily explain away. Because the organization can control fixtures, it can control schedules, it can control marketing campaigns. But it cannot control how supporters feel when they believe football is becoming harder to reach. That growing frustration found a voice when Ian Wright described the tournament as a World Cup of chaos. The phrase spread rapidly because it reflected a feeling that had been building for months. Expensive tickets, rising accommodation costs, travel complications, security concerns, visa questions, none of these issues alone threatened the tournament. But football fans don't experience events one headline at a time. They experience them collectively. They connect the dots, and when enough dots point in the same direction, a narrative begins to form. FIFA spent years promoting a vision of unity and celebration, yet many supporters arrived carrying concerns that had nothing to do with football itself. Every few days, another story emerged. Another debate started. Another controversy generated discussion online. The tournament was still attracting enormous audiences. Stadiums were still opening their gates, the football was still being played. Yet the atmosphere surrounding the event felt different. Less carefree, less uncomplicated, more uncertain. And for an organization that depends heavily on public perception, that uncertainty represented a challenge no amount of marketing could completely erase. What FIFA may have underestimated was how quickly individual stories could combine into something larger: trust. The World Cup has survived corruption scandals, political disputes, boycotts, and decades of criticism. Yet throughout all of those challenges, one belief remained remarkably strong. The belief that when the tournament finally arrived, football would bring people together. That for 1 month, differences would be set aside. But trust is fragile. It doesn't disappear overnight. It weakens gradually. One controversy, then another, then another. Eventually, supporters stop viewing incidents as isolated events and start viewing them as part of a pattern. That is where World Cup 2026 finds itself. Commercially, the tournament may be a huge success. Television audiences remain enormous. Sponsorship revenue continues to grow, yet public confidence operates according to different rules. Fans don't measure trust through balance sheets. They measure it through experience, through accessibility, through fairness, through the feeling that football still belongs to them. And once supporters begin questioning that feeling, the conversation changes. Suddenly, the issue is no longer about a referee or tickets or visas. It becomes something much harder to repair. And yet, amid all the controversy, football provided a reminder of why the World Cup remains so powerful. Marcelo Bielsa and Uruguay arrived carrying none of the institutional drama dominating the headlines. Bielsa was focused on what he has always been focused on: football. The details, the tactics, the obsession with improvement. In many ways, his presence represented the opposite of everything surrounding the tournament. While debates raged online, Bielsa was studying opponents. While headlines focused on controversy, his players were preparing for competition. It created a striking contrast. One World Cup existed in press conferences, political discussions, and social media arguments. Another existed on training grounds and inside stadiums. The World Cup where coaches chase perfection and players chase immortality. That contrast matters because it reminds supporters why they continue watching despite everything else. Football has always possessed a unique ability to rise above its own problems. The game itself often becomes stronger than the institutions attempting to manage it. And perhaps that is why, even in the middle of controversy, the tournament continues to captivate billions. The story of World Cup 2026 is not finished. In fact, it is only beginning. There will be unforgettable goals, dramatic upsets, heroes, villains, moments that become part of football history forever. But alongside those moments, another story continues to unfold. The story of how the largest World Cup ever organized became surrounded by so many questions before it truly found its rhythm. FIFA can point to attendance figures. It can point to television audiences. It can point to commercial success. Yet none of those numbers will ultimately determine how this tournament is remembered. Memory works differently. Fans remember emotions. They remember atmospheres. They remember stories. Years from now, the defining legacy of World Cup 2026 may depend on whether football itself becomes powerful enough to overshadow everything surrounding it. Because that is the challenge facing FIFA, not whether the tournament succeeds financially, not whether stadiums are full, but whether the game can reclaim the spotlight. The World Cup has begun. The controversy hasn't disappeared, and somewhere between those two realities lies the story that will define this tournament.